Okay, so today we are looking at cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. This is chapter 6. We are on day 6 as well, right? We're on day 6, even though we've only got 2 homeworks out. We're going to get day 7 out tomorrow, and then that'll be your last piece of homework. Um, it's all goofed up because of the because of doing those workshops. It always screws up with the schedule. But today we are doing CBT. So this is cognitive behavioral therapy, which sounds really similar to what we talked about yesterday, behavioral therapy, right? So if behavior therapy is all about your actions, cognitive behavioral therapy is all about your thoughts. And so yesterday we looked at sort of that 3-step process where our brains sort of go. Like we looked at our dog brains yesterday, right? We talked about how it's like there's some type of stimulus that we don't really have any control over, right? For the most part, most stimuluses we don't, unless we created them, we don't have any control. And then all of a sudden, our brain will go through some type of behavior associated with that stimulus, and that behavior results in some type of consequence. So if we see leftover pizza and we're like, oh man, I know that if I walk over there and I pick up that pizza, it's gonna taste really delicious, right? Um, and then the consequences are like, crap, I just fell off my diet, right? Or maybe it's something like, oh man, I just saw they released this new show on Netflix, or the new season of this show on Netflix, and I'm supposed to go for my run right now. Right? And then all of a sudden you're like, show on Netflix, I'm going to sit down to watch it. 6 episodes later, the day is gone. Consequences, you know, you lost your whole day. You don't get to do your workout today. So that's behavior therapy, right? Trigger, behavior, consequence. Boop, 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 right? Cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of similar. Cognitive behavioral therapy looks at how we all have different personalities, and those personalities are going to kind of reflect how we generally tend to respond. I'm kind of bummed out today that we have to do this over Zoom, because normally I love to do this big 5 personality test in person in class, and I love to chart it up on the whiteboard and show everybody what their personality kind of looks like. But I'll show you an example of mine, and I will have a handout for you guys if you want to take it at home, because it is kind of fun. Um, and I tried to find like a good version online, but I couldn't find any that were as fast as mine. I didn't want to be like, all right, go do this thing for 2 hours when you get home. So we'll look at like how personalities will kind of reflect how sometimes we automatically will emotionally or psychologically respond to certain things. And so it's a very similar paradigm, right? Like some type of event happens, which is going to trigger people's personalities to kick in, right? And then they're going to go through some type of like routine associated with that personality, which will result in some type of consequence, right? Which in this case, because we were very much talking about like, mental, emotional, things like that, those consequences are often like emotional, right, or intellectual. And so that's really what we're spending a lot of time today, right? We are looking at behavior therapy again, but we're looking at from like the aspect of our thoughts. We're looking at cognitive behavioral therapy. And so it's not really going to go through that 3-step process as intensely. Like we're definitely not going to spend as much time looking at that. Instead, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about personality and how to develop healthy obsessions. But then we're also going to talk about like problem solving today, which is one of my favorite things to talk about because I love the art of problem solving. And we'll look at like the different steps associated with that. This is very much supposed to be very mental, but I think that this 5-step process can be applied to literally anything. It's a little more in depth than the 3 steps that I tend to go over, where I'm just like, see a problem, fix that, solve that problem, implement that solution. This will go a little deeper than that. And then we'll also look a little bit about like stress management and talk about like, at the end, we'll talk about something that isn't necessarily a huge part of what we end up doing, but we'll look at rational emotive therapy too, which is a type of therapy that's out there. We're just going to mention it because like sometimes people will be using that. And we can somewhat apply some of those principles, but that's the idea that like words have a lot of power and a lot of meaning. If you've ever been talking to someone in some type of therapy. This is where they're like, how are you feeling? And you're like, mad. And it's like, okay, well, that was a horrible description of how you're feeling. So rational emotive therapy is all about like, all right, let's use some actual sentences. Let's use some actual words here. Like, describe to me how you're feeling. And so that's kind of a fun one. I like rational emotive therapy. There's a lot of, again, I'll bring it up later, but like there's a lot of really fun stuff about rational emotive therapy in the world of like what's called NLP, or neuro linguistic programming. Um, NLP is kind of like it's like the new gurus that are out there. You know how like there's so many people out there. There's like all the Tony Robbins types who are just like, if you believe you can do it, you know, and like this and that, and all that stuff is great. And a lot of them are getting really into this idea of NLP, and the idea is that like you can program your brain to be a more effective, positive person by just saying, "I'm an effective, positive person," like over and over and over again, like thinking only like constructive thoughts rather than negative ones. And it's very similar to cognitive behavioral therapy. So that'll be kind of fun when we get to that section. But that's what we're going. Whoops, that's what we're going over today. In the world of CBT. So let's, before we get into this, I got to show this intro. And so here we go. This is also what we're going over today.
Have you ever taken into consideration how the thoughts or internal dialogue that a client has might be affecting how they feel and what they do? This is exactly what cognitive behavioral therapy addresses. Cognitive behavioral therapy, commonly referred to as CBT, is another technique that counselors often use, and when used in a self-help guided fashion, you can use it too, in order to be more effective in getting clients to their goals. CBT focuses on a person's thoughts and the effect those thoughts have on an individual. Here, you'll learn about the role thinking plays in human behavior and how your clients' complex thoughts can affect their ability to achieve their goals. The way we perceive and think about events, not just the events themselves, dramatically impact our moods and the overall quality of our lives. For example, a woman who turns 40 years old can either feel great about her accomplishments to date, her evolving confidence, her sense of self, her maturing looks and physical skills, or she can feel very sad about her age and supposedly lost or lessened beauty or strength. It's very much about the 6 inches between the ears. You will learn and be able to apply some of the powerful CBT techniques such as self-monitoring, journaling, problem solving, stress management, cognitive restructuring, and more.
Okay. I forgot about that example. That example's so funny to me. Oh, crap, I closed the thing. Hold on. Okay, so yeah, so we are going to look at cognitive behavioral therapy. We are looking at people's thoughts today, right? And if we're going to understand that, we kind of need to understand a little bit about like our default thoughts that are kind of wrapped up in our overall personality first. So before we get into that, so CBT focuses on people's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and how they affect one another. So the idea here, that's over our overall definition. So the idea is that it's going to lead to interventions that focus on your thinking patterns and your feelings, right? So we are looking at like sort of what our general patterns and thoughts are, right? Like, like I'll be honest, like I think I grew up like watching, trying to think of like how if I'm being like really analytical about my own personality, right? I think I grew up watching a lot of like comics, particularly a lot of like Robin Williams, like early Robin Williams, like before he became like the Robin Williams that we kind of all knew and stuff. My parents had this like taped version of some of his stand-up, which a child should totally not be watching because like he was filthy. Which is so funny because he's like this lovable, childhood actor, but honestly, like his stand-up was brutal. But it was a lot of like self-deprecating humor. It was a lot of like making fun of himself and stuff. And I was like, man, that's so funny. Like that's a way of like pointing out these hilarious things that people can complain about, but you're doing it with yourself. And so like it leads to joy for everyone. And so I think that sometimes like I really enjoy like self-deprecating humor. I think that like that tends to be a big part of my personality. Sometimes I'll be a little overly critical or overly analytical. And I'm being so overly analytical. I mean, I'm being analytical right now. Because like it's just something that I kind of grew up around. It sort of shaped my personality, right? So what's kind of cool about CBT is like understanding these like parts of your personality can lead to a greater development of like interventions that are effective, right? Like by learning about this stuff, I'm gonna know like, okay, this is how my brain works. These are the kind of things that are gonna help me, right? So it focuses on your behaviors that improve those thoughts and feelings, right? So if self-deprecation was holding me back, like if that's something that's like damaging my life in a certain way, a therapist who's applying like CBT to somebody like me would say like, hey, we got to teach you to be like more positive, right? And so then like we find a way to like let's remove some of that like let's remove some of those negative like thoughts and replace them with something more constructive and more positive, right? What do you think you're great at? What are you like really solid on? And I think that's a really common thing. I think people can be really overly critical of themselves very easily. Um, there's a really great, it's funny, I actually have not read the book. I'm about to give you guys like a book advice for a book I haven't read, which is something you should never do. But I have listened to, I'm on my way there. I got, I'm like, it's like I've got like 4 books before I got to get to this one. Including like a couple fantasy novels just for fun. Because I've been reading, like quarantine, I was like, I gotta be super productive. So I went into like, all these like very like I was like, this is related to my profession, this is related to my profession, and this is related to making me a better me. And then now I'm just like, I gotta read something fun for a little bit. So I'm rereading some like fantasy books from high school. But there's a really great book that's all about personality called The Righteous Mind. And the idea is, it's like the idea behind like why good people are good people on both sides are divided by like politics and divided by religion. And those are the 2 things that people tend to like argue about, right? Politics and religion. So this is not so much like a huge book on cognitive behavioral therapy. That's totally not what this is. But it is kind of an interesting book that really does look a lot at personality and how sometimes your personality is actually genetic. Like sometimes it's pre-programmed. You come from like a line of parents whose personality is kind of similar to yours, and then like they are shaping that as you go along. And they've looked at people's brains and they've seen different parts of people's brains light up in different ways. And what this book does is it actually analyzes. They're like, could we tell someone's religion or could we tell someone's political affiliation without asking them any questions related to politics or religion, just by looking at their brain? So they asked them questions like, if you saw a mouse run into your house, what would you do? And they asked them a bunch of questions like that, and they were able to see certain parts of their brain light up. And they were like, if you saw like a kid in danger, what would what does that conjure up? Or it's like, I want you to imagine this is happening. And so they give them like a bunch of like different scenarios, and their brains lit up in different parts of their brains. And they asked them like, when you solve problems, how do you go about that process? Is it very step by step, or is it kind of all over the place? And it's interesting. They were able to be like, I assume that you land on the conservative spectrum or you land on the liberal spectrum. And they were like super accurate about it. Like they were crazy accurate about it. And that's what The Righteous Mind is all about. And so it's like the idea is that it's a book that's meant to kind of bring the 2 worlds together, because what we've seen in the world of politics and stuff is that like we've become further and further and further and further divided. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, but mostly it's because it's just easier to identify your party when it's super far in one direction. And so it's easier to get people to vote for one party in a 2-party system. But when they look at like people, like the idea is it's like, look, both of these are good people. Like you're both good, fine people, and there's no reason that it should be so vitriolic when you talk about like these things. Like you shouldn't hate the other side. So it's really cool. It's kind of a cool thing. And so it really does look a lot at personality, which is why I'm bringing it up. One of the biggest personalities that they look at is this first one right here, which is openness to experiences. And this openness to experiences is a really interesting predictor of whether or not like sometimes like your political affiliation. But it's also a big predictor of, and see how I'm circling it back, how you're going to come about your thoughts. So looking at CBT. So really quickly, we kind of need to review personality real quick. We need to look at personality. So personality in this definition is how an individual behaving in very specific ways to the various situations of everyday life. So obviously personality is just like, I mean, there's, trillions of combinations. Everyone is unique. Everyone has their own like perspectives and experiences in life, but we're going to boil it down to five big ones, right? We're going to boil this down to 5 main personalities here. And so the Big 5 personality test, which you can find online, Big 5 sporting goods, yep, personality test. If you look at the Big 5 personality test, it's only a few questions. It really isn't quite as long as you would think. But the idea is that you are going to be one of these 5 different traits. And here we are with another acronym, by the way. That's going to be your OCEAN, right? OCEAN. And so you can see like some people tend to be really intensive and some people tend to be very, some people tend to be very inventive and some people tend to be very consistent, right? That's the big one that they look at in the Righteous Mind, by the way. They look a lot at this openness one. And we find that like if you're really open to experiences and very inventive, where you're just like, I'm gonna try this and I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna go all over the place, right? That tends to be a very like generally like liberal brain. And then when you have someone who's a little more like, I'm gonna try this, then that, then this, and they go in a straight line in the way that they think, that tends to be a very like more conservative brain. So it's kind of cool. It's a very interesting thing. And both of them come to effect, this is what's important, both of them come to effective like solutions. And so like really the idea that like one is better than the other is a very flawed way of kind of looking at things. So we want to know a little bit about our client's personality. If we can understand a little bit insight into their thoughts and how they behave. So the Big 5 personality test is basically this assessment that divides people into these 5 very broad categories. Because people will act in very sort of predictive ways, right? So number 1 is openness to experience, right? So this tends to be somebody, if you are very high on the O part of the ocean scale of the ocean here, you tend to be very inventive and very curious rather than very consistent and very cautious. So people who tend to be inventive and curious, it reflects a high degree of intellectual curiosity and creativity, as well as a preference for like novelty and variety. So you're more likely, if you have a high like level of openness, you're more likely to be like, well, I could watch this movie again because I really love it, or I could watch something somewhat similar to it and try a totally different thing, right? Or maybe like, hey, I've never done one of these escape room things before, I'm gonna give that a shot, right? Like that kind of novel, like fun version. Like I tend to like strive a lot for openness. This is why like I tend to be pushed pretty far on a certain political spectrum that I'm not allowed to talk about because I'm a teacher. But like I tend to be pretty open and like kind of curious a lot of times, and I'm always pushing my friends. Like we'll play board games and I'll be like, what if we implemented this other rule and tried it this way? That might lead to more fun, and it almost never does. But my friends are so nice to even try. Like last night I was trying to invent like a version. We couldn't get enough. I couldn't get one of our roommates to play this board game with us because he was super busy. And so it was just my other roommate and I. And I was like, we could play this. And he's like, that's a 3-player game. And I was like, well, what if we alternated turns? We have this like one person who we can control each, and they can help you and then they can help me and then they can go back and forth. And he was like, I don't think that's going to work. And he was right. But that's sort of the O in the ocean, right? It's your openness. Do you tend to be very like curious or not? Again, people who tend to be a little more cautious and a little more consistent are a lot of times like very effective, right? Like just because like I'm not saying like one of these is better than the other. People who tend to be a little more cautious and a little more consistent are really great at like utilizing a routine to its highest effectiveness. Like they'll set like a routine and they know what that routine is, and it's like they're just an incredibly like efficient person who's like boom 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 boom, and they get so much done. So that's our first one. And then we're also going to have conscientiousness, right? Um, thank God I already have this typed out because I always have such a hard time spelling this word. Conscientiousness. But it's people who tend to be organized and efficient rather than easygoing and careless. So if you have a high level of conscientiousness, you tend to be super organized and super efficient. If you tend to be a right angle person, is what I like to kind of refer to it, where it's like, I just need to turn that a little bit. There we go. That's very satisfying. You know, like that's somebody who tends to have like a high level of conscientiousness. I'm just going to adjust this. You know, like that is totally like a little bit like sometimes you think of it as like type A personalities, right? Versus somebody who's like, it doesn't matter, you know, like, you know, you put it wherever you want. I know where it is. I tend to sometimes have low levels of conscientiousness in some ways. I tend to be really efficient when it comes to like modern technology things. Like it's so funny. I want my DVD shelf really organized. I want my desk really organized. I want my, you know, I want to understand where everything is in my desktop. I have rows and arranges. I have like a system in place. But then like in like my life, I remember one time my girlfriend asked, she was like, she asked for this one, what was it? Oh, it was, I think it was one of her hairbrushes. So like, I think like she had a hairbrush sitting on the end of the bed or something and it like rolled off and it like fell under the bed. And like, I saw it like while I was like out the door and I was like, I gotta remember that that's where that is in case she forgets it. And she didn't see it. She didn't find it. And like, I forgot to bring it up later and weeks went by and she's like, man, I've been looking for this hairbrush for weeks. I just don't know where it is. And I was like, oh, it's under the bed right here. And I like reached under and grabbed it. And she's like, how did you know that? And I was like, oh, I saw it rolling. She's like, why didn't you grab it? I was like, I was on my way out the door. And so it's like a little careless, a little too easygoing. So it reflects a person's perseverance in the face of challenges, right? That's what we mean by conscientiousness. So like if something challenging happens, somebody who tends to be very efficient and organized, it kind of glances off them like as a blow. And they're like, all right, that's all right. We can reroute over to here, and we can still get to where we're going, right? Imagine like somebody who, you know, this is why traffic is arranged in a grid, you know, for the most part, except for in freaking LA where it goes crazy sometimes. But for the most part, you know that if if this street is blocked off, you can just go down, up one, and then get right back on where you're going. Or at least you should be able to. Can I tell you guys how frustrated I get when I run into a dead end? It drives me insane. So that's conscientiousness, right? Now, extroversion. This is people who tend to be really outgoing and very energetic rather than people who tend to be very solitary or very reserved, right? So this reflects a person who has a lot of energy, very positive emotions, tends to be very assertive, as well as like very sociable. They seek the stimulation of like others, right? This is somebody who thinks better in like a group, right? And so that's somebody who's extroverted, whereas somebody who would be more introverted would be somebody who spends a little more time being like reflecting inwardly. And so they spend a lot of time sort of by themselves and like, becoming really effective. It's like, I just need a little bit of alone time. And then they come out and they develop a thing and they're like, boom, I got it, right? Again, both are really, really good, right? An extroversion person would be really great at like bouncing ideas off of someone else, whereas an introversion person would be a little more at like, I'm going to try this and this and this and this, and then they would sort of experiment alone before coming up with a solution. Again, awesome, right? And we want to know about a little bit of this. If you have a client who has like a high level of extroversion, they're going to do really well in group exercise classes, right? That's something that you could use as a tool to really keep them motivated and keep them on track. Whereas somebody who's a little more introverted, you're going to be a little better off, like maybe training in certain private corners of the gym and allowing them to like get a really great workout in and develop like a very, interpersonal relationship with them that's a little more intimate. Obviously intimate in the sense that like it's a little more private, right? And then you have agreeableness. Agreeableness tends to be people who tend to be very friendly and very compassionate, versus people who tend to be a little more analytical and very detached, right? So agreeableness reflects a person's tendency to be compassionate and cooperative, rather than somebody who tends to be very suspicious and antagonistic. Agreeableness is a funny one. You can always see this. Has anybody in here ever played like Werewolf or Mafia? It's a game. It's like a card game where basically you like the original version is like Mafia, and it's just where you take playing cards, you deal out a bunch of one suit. Like let's say you deal out a bunch of black cards, but then you're gonna put two red ones in the pile, and nobody knows who has what cards. And then one person doesn't play in the game; they just narrate, and so they go, okay. So it's day one in this sleepy little town, and then out of nowhere, someone got murdered. And what happened is like, okay, so we got to figure out what happened. So everybody close your eyes. And then you go, mafia people wake up, and the mafia people wake up, and then they get to see who the other, and they're like, and you be really quiet, you don't say anything. And then it's like, okay, mafia, who are you killing? And then they point, they like choose someone in the room while everyone else has their eyes closed. And they both agree, and it's like, okay, mafia, close your eyes. And then you say, everybody wake up. So everybody wakes up, and nobody knows who's in the mafia. And it's like, sadly, John has died. And, and then suddenly that person's like removed from the game. And then what happens is everybody has to be like, well, clearly it was Robert because he's wearing a Los Angeles hat. Like you just make a nonsense accusation based in nothing. And then what happens is everybody goes, oh, it's not, and then you just argue and argue until eventually the townspeople decide to kill someone. And so they're like, we're gonna hang this person. And then you go, okay, you decided to hang so-and-so. And then you reveal their card, and it's like, not in the mafia, And I know you go, oh, they are in the mafia. And it's like, okay, so he's been really friendly with him all night. Clearly he's in there as well. So it's kind of a fun guessing game. But that agreeableness, you can see so easily in people's personalities, where like you've got the one person in the room who will just accuse everyone and they're like, no, I got 10 reasons why. That's a very analytical person, whereas like a more agreeable person, it says very friendly and very compassionate, but a lot of times you'll see these people will oftentimes be like the most intense when you're playing games like that, because the idea that they would ever be accused of being on the wrong side of things, it hurts them. So you'll see them get like, these are the ones who push back really, 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 really hard. So that's kind of a funny one. And that's a funny way to kind of look at it. But very analytical or very detached versus very friendly and very compassionate. Then we have neuroticism, right? People who tend to be a little more neurotic are people who tend to be a little more sensitive, a little more nervous, versus people who tend to be very secure and very confident, right? And so the tendency for a person to experience unpleasant emotions pretty easily. They get angry a little easily. They tend to be very anxious or depressive. They feel very vulnerable. That's a high level of neuroticism. Sometimes you'll experience, this is a pretty common thing to experience a lot of times in our industry, just because our industry is so tied up in, people's confidence and health and things like that. And so sometimes like a lot of our clients, I say a lot, I guess not actually that many, but it's something you'll definitely experience. I don't know, maybe 25% of people. That's pretty high for neuroticism, but I think it's a little more common in our industry. No, that's like, it's like 1 in 4 people. That's too high. Probably 10%. Probably 10%. But you'll get a client who just like has some type of really bad experience with exercise. And so maybe they were bullied in high school. Maybe they have always tried to exercise and they've bullied themselves mentally. So you'll see that sometimes in our industry. And so when you recognize that in someone, we need to sort of combat that by, helping them feel more secure and helping them feel more confident and be like, hey, like you crushed this today. Like you realize you're exceptionally good at this one thing, right? And they go, no, I had no idea. And I was like, yeah, I mean, like you are really just like your attention to detail and your posture is fantastic. It's just some type of compliment that makes them feel really good. That's a great way to like really reach them. Those are sort of our big 5 personalities. Like I said, there's all kinds of these out on the internet. There's a bunch of charts that are out there, but you're gonna land in all kinds of different places, right? So here's here is an example of somebody's like scores, right? So this person was maybe a 90. This is a very like open person here, very conscientious, very extroverted, tends to be pretty compassionate, and very not neurotic, right? So there's a lot of like different versions of this. Dogs are about to freak out. Fair warning. Stay calm. Hold on, somebody's here. Tell you what, give me 1 second, guys. I'm gonna nip this in the bud. Dogs, go this way. Finn, come on. Grab your ball. Nope, grab the ball. Oh my God. Okay. And now they are the roommates' problems. Okay, so that is sort of our big five, right? So what's kind of cool is like studies have shown. So and again, you're gonna have high levels in like a lot. You know, you're not just gonna be one type of person. You're gonna have high levels in a lot of different scores. But the reason we're asking this, the reason we're looking at this, yeah. Oh, actually, really quickly. Yeah. So Myers-Briggs, right? Myers-Briggs is just like this. It's just a much, much more in-depth version. Myers-Briggs has a lot more questions. And this one, Myers-Briggs has like sort of two main sections to it. One of them is a little bit about your personality, similar to the big five. And one of them is also about how you solve problems. That's why Myers-Briggs is so much more popular and has kind of gained a lot more like a lot of people know what the Myers-Briggs personality test is. And that's because it is very related to how people solve problems, which if you're an employer, you kind of want to know a little bit about, right? So Myers-Briggs got popular because of like the business world. Both are really, really good. Yeah. I will say this, one little thing that I want to say, this is totally just an opinion, but I do like personality tests. I think that they are insightful, and I think that they are often accurate. Things like the Myers-Briggs, the Big Five, I think that a lot of times they can be accurate, but at the same time, this is totally just a personal opinion. You're not going to find this anywhere in your books or anything like that. In fact, honestly, this is probably the opposite of what your book would say. I think sometimes putting stock in what your personality is not a very bright idea, because then what ends up happening is you kind of get wrapped up in your own identity of like, well, I took this test and it told me that I'm this type of person, and then you kind of start being a little closed off to like actual like authentic experiences or authentic ways to feel. So I sometimes am a little critical of these personality tests and stuff. It's like the example that I always make fun of is like when someone says like, you know, like me, it's like, oh, well, I do this to myself as like a joke all the time, but it's like, oh, I'm Irish, so I've got, you know, I'm repressed, you know, like repressed and you know, drink in a cupboard. Or like somebody who's like Italian, they're like, I've got like a fiery Italian temper. And it's like, are you? Or have you told yourself that for so long that like you've kind of developed it? So I will say that about all these personality tests. That's my own sort of personal take on it. Or somebody who's like, well, I'm a Virgo, and so we do this. Every time somebody says that kind of stuff, I'm like, you've developed that yourself over time. That's confirmation bias. Studies have shown the big one that we do kind of want to pay attention to for our industry, conscientiousness can be a predictor of weight status. They have seen some direct parallels between low levels of conscientiousness and people who struggle with their weight. And so when we see individuals who lack that, right, a lot of times, like, remember, conscientiousness is you're organized and efficient, right? And so we see people who tend to be a little less organized, a little less efficient. They tend to struggle with their weight more often than people who aren't. And so how do we like enhance, right? Like if we're trying to get someone to take a little more control over their weight loss or weight gain or just, you know, health journey, how do we get them to do that? well, we can do things where we're like, we remeasure and we reassess consistently, and we encourage them to self-monitor, right? Self-monitoring and planning are really great tools for clients who have the low level of conscientiousness, because that's a really great way for them to help identify like what they've been consuming, right? And this is why we've seen like I've talked about this study before, but one of my favorite studies that's ever been done is often the ones where they lie to people, where they say like, hey, we're going to put you on this diet in 6 weeks, but before we put you on the diet, we need to know what your diet looks like now. And they put them on like, they're like, we need you to food journal for the next 6 weeks, and then the experiment will begin. And the experiment was the 6 weeks of food journaling. And what they found is everybody lost weight. Like, and it's like, it's not because they were burning calories, writing stuff down. It was because people started to like see what they were consuming, and it increased their conscientiousness. And they're like, oh my God, I have so many of like these things. My roommate one time went to Costco and bought like a giant thing of walnuts or almonds, or some type of, oh, it was cashews. He like bought a bunch of cashews, and he was just like, he would sit there and like eat them while he's like playing video games and stuff. And he was like on this weight loss routine, and at one point he came to me and he was like, man, I don't know why I'm not like losing weight. I've been on this diet, I've been exercising every day. He's like, do you have any tips? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, let's take a look at like what you're doing. And so I kind of helped him analyze some stuff, and I couldn't figure it out. Like, he was like, I'll have like a handful of nuts here and there. And to me, that meant like a quarter cup, because that's about a handful. And a quarter cup is about 200 calories and of pretty much any nut. And I was like, yeah, that can't be it. And then I was sitting in his room one day watching him. He was just like handful of, I mean, he was draining one of these giant things. I was like, Andrew, I was like, you just had like 1,000 calories worth of nut. Like, I was like, so many. Like, and like, those are good calories. Like, nuts are super healthy, but holy crap, like just in terms of energy balance, like you are out of whack. And he was like, no. And I was like, yes. Like, I was like, they're not, you would be better off with potato chips. They would be lower in calories. Like, and he was making all these, he was doing like a Costco run every 2 weeks. And he was getting another giant jar. And there was like, it's really like 4,000 calories in each of those jars. It was crazy. I mean, it was just a crazy amount. That's also very funny. And so that's conscientiousness, right? Like, this is why one of like the best dieting tips you can give your clients is like, do not eat food out of the package. Take it out and put it on a plate. When you see food disappear, you are more likely to be aware that you consumed it, and you'll be less hungry afterwards. When you eat something out of a package, you don't see it disappear slowly. So it's almost like you're resetting every single time, and your brain doesn't make any anti-hunger hormones. And that's we're getting into hormones, but like that's a big reason why we want to enhance conscientiousness as often as we can with our clients. You guys know how much I love to harp on journals. So using the CBT perspective with the personality for your clients, by identifying how your clients think and feel and behave, it allows us to kind of come up with the right interventions, right? It allows us to use the right things. If your client has low conscientiousness, you need to focus on like monitoring and be a little more hands-on with your client, because they are likely to fall off of the wagon. They are likely, with low levels of conscientiousness, to fall off of a routine without even realizing that they fell off the routine. It's like, hey, have you been exercising a lot lately? And it's like, yeah, I have. Oh man, how much have you been exercising? And then they think back, it's like, well, I mean, I guess I skipped like 3 days this week, but like normally it's really good. And it's like, it seems really good, right? But the actual amount of energy somebody's burning might be quite low. And this is why, like, it's funny, there's no magic getting 10,000 steps a day, but like, that's been shown to be so effective for so many people, just because it's an easy thing to pay attention to once a day. You just look at your watch and you're like, oh, nope, not 10,000. And then you head out the door. It increases your conscientiousness for you. So this is what that personality sheet's going to look like. So you can see here, you basically are just going to answer these 10 questions. And they kind of, it goes in a weird order. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And these 2 questions up top are related to the O. These 2 are related to the C. These 2 are related to the E, A, and the N. And so like, you're going to give yourself a score of like 1 to 7. And if you score high on both of these, you know, you'd be like up here. And so it kind of creates like an interesting little web here. Um, so that's your big 5 personality sheet. And I'll attach that for everybody. And at the end here, we'll kind of go through it and I'll show you what it looks like for me. So what techniques can we use once we kind of identify our client's personality? What type of techniques can we use to help our clients, right? Well, one of the things obviously we have is goal setting, right? We've talked plenty about that. We've also got using things just like coming up with general plans of action. We're going to look a little bit at problem solving today. Problem solving and planning are kind of similar. We'll also look at like just simply having stress management. Decisional counseling. Decisional counseling is a big one to help also enhance conscientiousness. Like, hey, I want you to imagine and think, like, do you really want this thing? I had a client who I did not come up with this. My client, she kind of figured out what would help herself, but she worked in an office with all these like different candy jars, right? Like she was like in a cubicle, and what you do when you work in an office full of cubicles is you put a candy jar out so that people will come and talk to you. And so this office was just full of these things. And, you know, she found herself like snacking on them all day. And it you know, she'd get kind of frustrated with herself because she couldn't have that control. So what she did is she told everybody in the office, she was like, hey, can you do me a favor? Anytime you see me reach for one of those jars, can you just ask me like, hey, do you really want one of those? And if I say yes, great, like I'm going to have it. But if I say no, then, you know, that's awesome. That gave me a second to just stop my brain so that it didn't become automatic. And I was like, what a freaking great solution. Like you nailed it. Like, and it was a really cool like thing. And I've used that with other clients for years. It's just like, take a second to consider, like, do I really want this? Or am I doing it because like I might be bored or dehydrated, or, you know, your brain will often send you cravings. But a lot of times they will be very much, false cravings, or you know, we'll misread them. And then visualization is a big one. That's what we're going to look at tomorrow. Actually, we're going to talk about like how to develop imagery with your clients. So one of the best things that you can do is create what are called healthy obsessions. And so healthy obsessions are a lot of times we see the word obsess and we kind of think of it as like a negative, right? It's like obsessions, like, oh God, you're obsessed with that. Healthy obsessions are the good type of obsessions. These are things that we sort of want to be obsessed with, right? You as a trainer, you should be obsessed with sales. And that sounds kind of weird, but like you should be obsessed with like how good of a salesperson you can be, because the better like a salesperson you are, the more sessions you're going to have, and the more sessions you have, the bigger change you're going to have on the world, and the more people you're going to help. That's why like a lot of times like sales gets like a bad rap, and it for a lot of times deserves it. There's a lot of people who use, you know, sales technique for evil. But like we should have like a healthy obsession with this idea of like, you know, getting as many clients as we can so that we can help as many people as possible. Or healthy obsessions are a constant preoccupation with planning and execution of target behaviors, right? In order to reach like a healthy goal. So basically you are checking in every day on like how you know, many steps you got or how active you are. I will say when it comes to healthy obsessions, I think that like self-monitoring is really important. But like, be cautious on this one. Like if somebody's checking the scale every day, I think weight is a unique one. I think weight is one that like becomes an unhealthy obsession. Just because weight is not a great predictor, but we put so much emphasis on it. It's like really what you should be paying more attention to is your health, and your health and your weight are not the same thing. So that's one that like I will say I put a little cautious in. Like when I say create healthy obsessions, you should be checking like how many minutes of activity did I get? You know, how hard did I push it in my workout yesterday? How good has my eating been lately? Like, you know, in a very positive way. But I will say I caution people against like hitting the scale every day. That one's one that I'm not a fan of. But daydreaming, planning, routining, all of those things when it comes to your target behaviors, right? The things you are trying to increase. Like me lately, I've been like trying to take a little more control over my credit. So I like signed up for one of those credit score, trackers and stuff. And I check it like every couple of days. And I'm just like, just to see it. And it's like, it went up by 1 point today. And I'm like, oh yeah. And I get really excited about it, right? Like that's totally like, I have this like weird obsession. And I've been like goofing around with the stock market a little bit lately, and I'm just like, oh man, it's up this many points, and like that's that ding right there was one of my stocks went up by 6.1% today. That's hilarious. Good timing. Who was it? WM. I don't remember who that is. Oh my God, it's Walmart. I forgot I put money in Walmart. I even like Walmart, but Warren Buffett. So that's a healthy obsession, right? So daydream, plan, and like keep these routines. This is where self-monitoring becomes so important, right? Self-monitoring, right? This systematic observation of how often you are doing these target behaviors, right? So a lot of times your long-term goals, which because they're long term, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of like when you're making progress or when you're not. Well, long term, a lot of times can be really enhanced through self monitoring, right? Check out those workout logs, check out those food journals, improve your performance by like, it improves your commitment by checking in every single day. So I love this. This is like my favorite part. It says there's no fixed method for self-monitoring, right? That's very true. Some people are really great about like, again, if you are a very conscientious person, you are constantly doing like self-monitoring in your head. You ask a conscientious person how many times, like for how many minutes they worked out, they could probably go 88 minutes this week. You know, it's like, good God, that person's organized, right? Whereas me, I'm like 2 times for many minutes, you know. And I love, like, I write all that stuff down. So that's why that is where self-monitoring really comes in. It kind of enhances your conscientiousness for you, you know. So it benefits you by enhancing your commitment. It benefits you by enhancing your awareness. So journaling, really classic example of this, right? Keep notes. When we look at it from the cognitive behavioral therapy perspective, right, which is all about thoughts and feelings, journal about like your thoughts and feelings about your workouts. This is actually where the world of working out has sort of combined with like the world of just regular old like bodybuilding or powerlifting. You know, one of the things that we do as trainers is, and Nicholas, this is a term that we actually, I don't think we've used with you yet. But there's a scale that we use to monitor someone's intensity of how hard they're working called the RPE scale. That's your rating of perceived exertion scale. And so it's a scale, weirdly enough, from 6 to 20. And so the idea is that like a 6 is someone who's basically like sitting in a chair resting, and a 20 is somebody who's like ready to vomit because they are just sprinting all out as absolutely hard as they can. And so we're constantly in a blend of that. And exercise starts around like a 14 on that scale. Now, the world in the last like several years, the world of powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, bodybuilding, they've started to use a modified version of the RPE scale. They still call it an RPE scale, and they go on like a scale of 1 to 10. And it's like the idea that like a 7 is where, you know, work really begins. Like you should be lifting around 70% of your maximum effort. And then like a 10 is like when you're hitting the very peak of your routine. You should be hitting 10s, you know, when you're trying to peak, maybe right before competition. And it's kind of cool. It's like they've taken this scale and they've used it and they've seen like incredible effects. You know, a lot of times like the traditional version of powerlifting was like, let's look at your weight, let's look at the percentages, right? You said this was your 1 rep max. This is your percentage of 1 rep max. And you would just do 85%, 85%, 85%, next week, 90%, 90%, and you would just math it all out. But not everybody is like a math brainer, right? Like not everybody really thinks that way. So they started journaling instead, and they started asking like, how did your workout feel today? It's like, you know what? I got a little frustrated today because like my squats felt a little stiff and I felt like I was leaning forward a little bit much. And I lost some weight on that squat. And it's like, okay, great. So by journaling, they just came to that awareness. It's like, yeah. And then next time they open it up and it's like, I was leaning forward a little bit and I lost power on my squat. And so it made my squat ache a little bit. I'm going to stretch my calves out a little more today before my workout gets started. And then that takes that lean away because they can sit into a more comfortable position. And that journaling had crazy effect in the powerlifting world. And so now you're going to hear all these really fun stories about, you know, Olympic weightlifters, right? Journaling about their workouts, just like writing, taking 10 minutes after their workout is over and writing about like how they felt the day was. And a lot of coaches have been implementing that. They do it with NBA players, they do it with football players. They have them just journal about like, how did you feel about today's workout? And they've found incredible results with it, because it just increases, again, their conscientiousness, and simple awareness. So before we move into problem solving, I want to show you guys my all-time favorite video on the whole internet. So this is, I've been watching, this is like my favorite video I've watched for years and years and years. And I'm gonna need to pause this really quickly. Hold on. And so the idea here, I think I've shown this somewhere recently. So if you've already seen this, bear with me. But this is all about awareness. This is all about like how to develop awareness. And the more awareness you have, in my opinion, the healthier and happier you're going to be. So this is a really cool, this is actually a graduation speech. But here we go. Watch this video.
There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" The point of the fish story is merely that the most obvious, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. Stated as an English sentence, of course, this is just a banal platitude. But the fact is that in the day-to-day trenches of adult existence, banal platitudes can have a life or death importance. The plain fact is that you graduating seniors do not yet have any clue what day in, day out really means. There happen to be whole, large parts of adult American life that nobody talks about in commencement speeches. One such part involves boredom, routine, and petty frustration. The parents and older folks here will know all too well what I'm talking about. By way of example, let's say it's an average adult day. You get up in the morning, go to your challenging white-collar college graduate job, and you work hard for 8 or 10 hours, and at the end of the day, you're tired and somewhat stressed, and all you want is to go home and have a good supper and maybe unwind for an hour and then hit the sack early, because of course you have to get up the next day and do it all again. But then you remember there's no food at home. You haven't had time to shop this week because of your challenging job. And so now after work, you have to get in your car and drive to the supermarket. It's the end of a work day and the traffic is apt to be very bad. So getting to the store takes way longer than it should. And when you finally get there, the supermarket is very crowded because of course it's the time of day when all the other people with jobs also try to squeeze in some grocery shopping. But you can't just get in and quickly out. You have to wander all over the huge, overlit store's confusing aisles to find the stuff you want. And you have to maneuver your junky cart through all these other tired, hurried people with carts, et cetera, cutting stuff out because it's a long ceremony. And eventually, you get all your supper supplies, except now it turns out there aren't enough checkout lanes open, even though it's the end of the day rush. So the checkout line is incredibly long, which is stupid and infuriating, but you can't take your frustration out on the frantic lady working the register, who is overworked at a job whose daily tedium and meaninglessness surpasses the imagination of any of us here at a prestigious college. But anyway, you finally get to the checkout line's front and you pay for your food and get told to have a nice day in a voice that is the absolute voice of death. And then you have to take your creepy, flimsy plastic bags of groceries in your cart with the one crazy wheel that pulls maddeningly to the left, all the way out through the crowded, bumpy, littery parking lot. And then you have to drive all the way home through slow, heavy, SUV-intensive rush hour traffic, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone here has done this, of course, but it hasn't yet been part of you graduates' actual life routine, day after week, after month, after year. But it will be. And many more dreary, annoying, seemingly meaningless routines besides. But that is not the point. The point is that petty, frustrating crap like this is exactly where the work of choosing is going to come in. Because the traffic jams and crowded aisles and long checkout lines give me time to think. And if I don't make a conscious decision about how to think and what to pay attention to, I'm going to be pissed and miserable every time I have to shop. Because my natural default setting is the certainty that situations like this are really all about me. about my hungriness and my fatigue and my desire to just get home. And it's going to seem for all the world like everybody else is just in my way. And who are all these people in my way? And look at how repulsive most of them are, and how stupid and cow-like and dead-eyed and non-human they seem in the checkout line, or at how annoying and rude it is that people are talking loudly on cell phones in the middle of the line. And look at how deeply, personally unfair this is. If I choose to think this way in the store and on the freeway, fine. Lots of us do. Except thinking this way tends to be so easy and automatic that it doesn't have to be a choice. It is my natural default setting. It's the automatic way that I experience the boring, frustrating, crowded parts of adult life when I'm operating on the automatic, unconscious belief that I am the center of the world and that my immediate needs and feelings are what should determine the world's priorities. The thing is that, of course, there are totally different ways to think about these kinds of situations. In this traffic, all these vehicles stuck and idling in my way, it's not impossible that some of these people in SUVs have been in horrible auto accidents in the past and now find driving so terrifying that their therapist has all but ordered them to get a huge, heavy SUV so they can feel safe enough to drive. Or I can choose to force myself to consider the likelihood that everyone else in the supermarket's checkout line is just as bored and frustrated as I am, and that some of these people probably have much harder, more tedious or painful lives than I do. Again, please don't think I'm giving you moral advice, or that I'm saying you're supposed to think this way, or that anyone expects you to just automatically do it, because it's hard. It takes will and effort, and if you are like me, some days you won't be able to do it, or you just flat out won't want to. But most days, if you're aware enough to give yourself a choice, you can choose to look differently at this fat, dead-eyed, over-made-up lady who just screamed at her kid in the checkout line. Maybe she's not usually like this. Maybe she's been up 3 straight nights holding the hand of her husband who's dying of bone cancer. Or maybe this very lady is the low-wage clerk at the motor vehicles department who just yesterday helped your spouse resolve a horrific, infuriating red tape problem through some small act of bureaucratic kindness. Of course, none of this is likely, but it's also not impossible. It just depends what you want to consider. If you're automatically sure that you know what reality is and who and what is really important, if you want to operate on your default setting, then you, like me, probably won't consider possibilities that aren't annoying and miserable. But if you really learn how to think, how to pay attention, then you will know you have other options. It will actually be within your power to experience a crowded, hot, slow, consumer hell type situation as not only meaningful, but sacred, on fire with the same force that lit the stars. Love, fellowship, the mystical oneness of all things deep down. Not that that mystical stuff's necessarily true. The only thing that's capital T true is that you get to decide how you're going to try to see it. This, I submit, is the freedom of real education, of learning how to be well-adjusted. You get to consciously decide what has meaning and what doesn't. That is real freedom. That is being educated and understanding how to think. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. I know that this stuff probably doesn't sound fun and breezy or grandly inspirational the way a commencement speech is supposed to sound. What it is, as far as I can see, is the capital T truth with a whole lot of rhetorical niceties stripped away. You are, of course, free to think of it whatever you wish. But please don't just dismiss it as some finger-wagging Dr. Laura sermon. None of this stuff is really about morality or religion or dogma or big fancy questions of life after death. The capital T truth is about life before death. It is about the real value of a real education, which has almost nothing to do with knowledge and everything to do with simple awareness. Awareness of what is so real and essential, so hidden in plain sight all around us all the time, that we have to keep reminding ourselves over and over, this is water. This is water.
Okay, So that is literally my favorite video on the internet, because it's all about, again, like kind of developing awareness, right? Like, it's not, and choosing like how you sort of want to react to things. Like, it's easy to by default get frustrated with someone. What's difficult is take the time to say it's not impossible that like this person's going through something else and they didn't have time to consider the others around them, or they didn't have time to consider like how it would affect my life, right? um Versus like kind of by default just being like, it's totally unfair that this person is like shoving their car through my life, you know. So I really love that video, because it doesn't even once mention cognitive behavioral therapy, but I think it gets to the heart of what CBT is, better than anything else out there. So all right, let's go ahead and pivot. And now that we sort of have, hopefully, I mean, we have one heck of an understanding of sort of like what CBT is, let's pivot into how we can kind of help our clients sort of develop solutions to what they are actually struggling with. And so this is where we come to problem solving, right? So problems are basically dilemmas that just don't have like an immediate apparent solution, right? Like, it's not like you can't just look at something and be like, okay, this is the answer, right? So that's like when you're kind of struggling with some type of problem. So problem solving is a method for overcoming the negative behaviors or the negative thoughts or feelings that are associated with those behaviors, right? A lot of times people will get very frustrated when they are trying to solve problems, and they'll see no light at the end of the tunnel and be like, I'm never going to get to solve this. I'm never going to be able to, succeed here and here and here. I just don't know how I'm going to get there, right? Again, like if you want to, if you look at it from the perspective of like, maybe you want to make a certain amount of money, sometimes people are just like, I just don't see how in my minimum wage job I'm ever going to be able to save enough money for a house. And maybe that is true, so let's come up with a solution for how to get there, right? So our 5 steps to problem solving, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to set a general orientation. You're going to set the problem. This is basically just you taking a second to recognize that it's a problem, and you also have to recognize that it can be solved. A lot of times people are either really good at one of these or really good at the other one. Sometimes people will go, well, it's not really a problem, I can just change. It's like, all right, you're not recognizing that this is an issue. And then other people are like, yeah, it's an issue and I can never overcome it. That's somebody who's failing to recognize that there is a solution to our problems, right? If you've ever seen like, there's a lot of times anybody who's ever overcome like addiction, this is the first step that they're going to go through, like is simply admitting that it's a problem, right? So that's step 1. First thing you need to do is identify like what the problem is, or recognize that a problem exists. Step 2, you need to identify specifically what that problem is, which sometimes like I think kind of gets wrapped up into step 1 here. But what separates like step 2 from step 1 is that you are going to separate the relevant information from the irrelevant information. Okay. And this is what a lot of people really struggle with sometimes. People will oftentimes be like, I missed my workout today, and so that means I'm definitely not going to reach my goal, right? That, don't get me wrong, like it's a problem that you didn't hit your workout, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like relevant to the success of this routine, as long as you find a way to make it up later, because at the end of the day, it's all just a big balance, right? So sometimes people will have like, they'll be like, oh, I struggle like maintaining muscle mass because I have a super fast metabolism and I can't get enough calories in, right? It's like, well, it's not that you can't get enough calories in, it's that you are, focusing on low energy dense foods. And so it's difficult for you to get enough calories for you to maintain weight, right? So a lot of times, like there's some irrelevant information in there that gets tied into. We as human beings, we're really good at like drawing connections between things and like kind of writing a storyline in our head that helps us understand things. And a lot of times that storyline doesn't really make any, there's just some plot holes in that story. So you need to separate the relevant stuff from the irrelevant stuff. And then we also, step 3, we want to generate some alternatives. Now, this is one that sometimes people mess up a little bit, because they'll be like, what if I tried this? No, that's stupid. And then they won't like take it seriously or see it towards the end. You in step 3, don't judge your solutions. Just generate as many alternatives as you can. Like, be like, well, what if I all of a sudden just found ways to exercise, an hour a day in the morning and this and that. And it's like, you've got some crazy schedule where that literally is impossible. That's okay. Generate that alternative, get it up on paper for now. We will try out that alternative later. For now, just throw as many things at the wall as you can, just as many possible solutions, no matter how impossible they seem. Then in step 4, you can choose the best strategy available. And so, like, let's say, I'm actually going to steal an example from a book that I've been reading recently, Robert. But let's say, like, you're trying to figure out what school you want to go to, right? You could sit down and make a list of, like, I want to go to Harvard, Stanford, like, just lay them all out there. And then, some more schools that are like, sort of low probability, and then choose some that are a little more high probability. You're just going to lay them all out of there. And then you can generate alternatives and be like, okay, which of these, you can make a decision. It's like, which of these are the most likely that I can spend my energy and time and effort on? And that's where you choose the best strategy available to you out of all of the alternatives that you listed out. And so, like, that's a really good example of, like, decision making and how generating alternatives sort of tie together. Lastly, you're going to try it out. Lastly, you're gonna go through this chosen strategy, right? Once you come up with, like, your decision to, try one specific thing, now it's your turn to actually, like, test your theory, right? This could take place over a day, it could take place over a week, it could take place over a month, try things out and see what works, So those are sort of like our 5 steps to problem solving. This, by the way, totally applies to, like, your thoughts. It applies to your actions. It applies to your life in general. I think that you can use this 5-step process for literally anything. I think this is one of the most flexible and valuable parts of this entire course. But, like, if you want to exercise more, right? First, you got to recognize a problem, which is like, hey, I don't exercise enough. Then you need to define it carefully. It's like, hey, I'm not getting, enough activity on a daily or weekly basis. Then you need to generate some alternatives, like, okay, how am I going to increase my activity? I could try getting 10,000 steps a day. I could try going to the gym more. I could, while I'm at work, try to, like, go down the flight of stairs and up every hour on the hour, right? There's a couple different, list out a bunch of things, then be like, what, the most realistic one is just getting up an hour earlier and just going for a walk before I start my morning routine, right? Maybe that's the most realistic for you, or maybe something else is most realistic for you. And then try it out, see if it works for a week, set that alarm an hour earlier, get your butt out the door and go for a couple laps before you, get back. And you'll find that, like, those early morning sunrises, man, they're worth it. I'm definitely biased because I like to be an early riser, but, like, that's a great example of, like, trying that out. So another one of our tools that we have at our disposal is also stress management. This is a lot of times, like, a lot of times our stresses come from these irrational thoughts or irrational fears. And so stress management is literally just learning how to deal with some of that irrational stress. What stress is, like, a negative emotional response where basically you're just dealing with, like, a lot of stressors, and stressors are just challenges from your environment, right? So stressors are where you're dealing with, like, some type of major life-changing event, such as, like, maybe you're having struggles in your relationship, or maybe you've got some type of illness or injury, maybe you forgot something, maybe you got bad traffic, bad weather. These are sort of daily hassles versus, like, major things, but these are both examples of stressors, right? These big ones are over here that kind of sit with you, and then you kind of deal with them on the long term, but these daily hassles add up. If you are consistently, like, being late due to, like, traffic problems or something else, you are going to be constantly in, like, a state of stress. And so a lot of times people will be like, and this is a classic example of, like, don't get me wrong, traffic problems totally exist. They are a real thing. But a lot of times when you see these people who are just like, I'm sorry I'm late, there was really bad traffic, and then like they show up again and it's like, I'm sorry I'm late, there was really bad traffic. It's like, after a while, it's like we need to go back through our problem solving methods and be like, hey, maybe the definition is not that traffic is bad. Maybe the actual definition of your problem is that you are not leaving the house early enough. That is something that I straight up did deal with, like at Sochi. When I first switched from being an evening instructor to being a morning instructor, I was late. I mean, I wasn't late. Be clear here, I wasn't late, but I was definitely like not early to get my class set up on time. And so I was always like erasing the whiteboard in like a hurry. And I was like rushing, and I was like losing my temper in traffic where I was like, come on, and I was getting there like 2 minutes before I needed to clock in. And I was always like just barely on time. And it's like, hey, dummy, traffic at night is different from traffic in the morning. And then my brain was like, like I don't know why I didn't come to that realization more quickly, but like the irrelevant information was like, there's so many people on the road. No, the relevant information is like, I need to leave at a different time, so that's learning how to like define your problem clearly, right? And so one of the ways that you can deal with stress is through like what we call stress inoculation. I love that this is literally the definition here, but it's basically you are building little psychological antibodies to stress. This is where you are just getting used to the idea of like being in a stressful situation. And that's what life is. I mean, life is a series of stressful situations. So if you are just allowing those to create these super negative emotions in your life, you're going to be miserable. So a lot of times, one of the ways to kind of inoculate yourself to stress is to eliminate the unknown information. Like a lot of times, like what often stresses us out most is just fear of the unknown. Like human beings we are so afraid of stuff that we don't know or stuff that we don't understand. And so like learning how to just like gain perspective on that and learn a little bit about it can kind of help us detach that stress from like the negative emotions that are associated with it. It's still going to be a stressor, but by being like, okay, realistically, I know this, and this, and so that's not quite as scary. That's a really big part of like inoculating yourself to that stress. You'll hear about people who are like getting over their fear of like spiders or getting over their fear of like, swimming or water or heights or something like that. Like what would you tell somebody who's like afraid of heights? Probably say something like, like the railing is too tall for you to fall over. Like if they're like on top and like of the Space Needle or something, and they're like, there's no way I'm going out there, right? It's like, hey, there's like a giant, like super thick glass wall. That's the first thing you're gonna tell someone, right? And so like that's the first bit of inoculating them. Maybe it's not enough, right? Maybe that's not the first bit, but then like helping them develop coping self-statements, that's another way to kind of help them inoculate that stress and be like, hey, I just want you to like, I already educated you. There's no way that you can fall out. Now you need to say that to yourself. I was like, okay, there's no way I can fall off. There's no way I can fall off, right? And so like there's a lot of different types of self-statements out there. They're simply like preparing for the stressor. Be like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this, right? Like you say it all the time. And then like confronting and handling that stressor, right, is where it's actually like, okay, I can handle this, right? I can confront this. I can handle it. Or maybe it's like confronting your feelings. It's like, I'm not going to lose my temper. I'm not going to lose my stress. I'm not going to, have these negative emotions. And then one of the best things you can do and continue that inoculation is once you've kind of successfully dealt with something, give yourself a pat on the back, right? Take time to be like, man, I did it. I'm awesome. I got this, right? At the pet store, there was this one therapist who was like a customer of ours. He was like, and Astoria, like, again, is a very small town. So it was like one of, maybe 2 or 3 therapists. But this one was like a customer of ours because they have this really, really big black lab that they bring into the pet store all the time. It was like a Newfoundland mix, giant dog. And they kind of got friendly with my dad. And so she would bring her customers to the pets. She would bring her clients to the pet store to like help them, like inoculate them against like fear. Like if she was like, one of the best ways, you need to learn how to get over and face your fears. And so like a lot of people were just scared of spiders, and we used to sell tarantulas at the pet store. And so they like, as she like asked my dad, she's like, can I start bringing my clients here? And every now and then, like, she would come down with a client and be like, hey, we're gonna hold a spider today. And it's just like a way for them to kind of deal with like, and so my dad would be like, look, it's super like, he's like, I'm gonna be very real with you. It's not a friendly animal, but it's not an unfriendly animal either. It nothings you. Like, it has no awareness of like you, and it has no reason to bite or anything like that. And even if it did, it's about like a bee sting. And so like there's no venom, they're not dangerous, and so he'd like educate them a lot about the tarantula. And then he'd say like something like, and you got to remember, there's a living creature that is 80% water. So if you drop them, it's going to die. Like, don't do that. And they're about the size of like my palm here. They're big. They're the ones you always see in movies. They're rose hair tarantulas. For those of you who are afraid of spiders, look away. So we used to sell these at the pet store, and they're, we'd call them rosies, and they're super friendly. They really are. They're really quite friendly animals. Well, that's not true. They're nothing animals. They will relax and move around in your hand and display no emotion. It's not like you see a spider get excited and be like, ah. But so it would start, my dad would always like kind of be like, educate him a little bit, and he'd tell him all these like fun little facts about spiders. And then he'd say, now what's going to happen is I'm going to put the spider in your hand really quickly, and you are not going to drop it. Like, my dad would always do it to these people. He'd go, you are not, that was like his catchphrase, you are not going to drop it. And like, it was like my dad was yelling at strangers. And sure enough, he'd like grab somebody by the wrist, and he would just dump them on there really quickly. And they would always do the same thing. They would go, and then like, kind of deal, and they would just walk around, and that would sort of inoculate them to the idea. And then like the therapist would be like, they gotta say like, see, I'm awesome, like I faced my fears, and like they would help them recognize like this overcoming sensation that they just experienced. It was kind of cool, right? Like it was just kind of a cool moment for them. And one lady we did it with, this is my favorite part of this, one lady that we did this with became obsessed with facing her fears, and she ended up buying one of those tarantulas and became like an owner. And then she ended up getting, we sold a bunch of like other exotic stuff too. We used to sell scorpions, black emperor scorpions, which are also the ones you'll see in movies because they're not poisonous. And we used to sell these things called vinegaroons, which is like a cross between a scorpion and a cockroach. They're really weird looking. Vinegaroons. That's totally not how you spell it. Vinegaroons. Yeah, they look really weird. Yeah, that's what they are right there. And they got this really weird like little prong on the end. And if they sting you, it actually tastes like vinegar in your mouth, which is weird. Or so I've been told. Never actually been stung because you take good care of them. But yeah, all of these different, she bought millipedes, she bought all these like weird exotic insects, and she like got super into it after facing her fears. So that's sort of stress management. You learn how to kind of deal with these things. Now, here's the thing. Nobody's going to be perfect, and that's okay. That's another part of like recognizing your feelings and your emotions, right? So there is a difference between I've fallen back into old habits and I fell off the wagon for a second. And that's recognizing the difference between, lapsing and relapsing, right? So a lapse is a simple temporary misstep in judgment. Let's say you got a client moving forward in the stages of change. They've been in the action stage for 6 weeks, right? They haven't maintained it for 6 months just yet, right? They're not necessarily in maintenance. So they are at risk for relapse. And let's say they cancel on you. They're like, I stayed out really late last night. It was my birthday, and I'm just not coming in today, right? It's okay for things like that to happen. But if the next time you see them, they're like, man, I'm so frustrated with myself. I ended up like after that phone call being awake enough anyways, and I drank some water and I felt fine. I should have come to the gym. And they get really, really down on themselves, right? They are making this assumption that they're falling back into old untargeted behaviors. They're falling back into old bad habits. And the problem with that is the more often they say it, we know that our thoughts, we know that our feelings, we know that our actions have consequences, like real life consequences. So if they start to believe that they are falling back, it can sort of be a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And sure enough, they are going to skip more and more and more. So helping your client like recognize that like a lapse is different from a relapse is a pretty important part of our job. And so be like, hey, this is a temporary misstep. Like you missed your session. And guess what? That's not actually okay. I'm not here to say that it's fine that you missed your session. We want to be here as often as possible. But what I am saying is just because it happened once doesn't mean it has to happen again. Right. And that's the difference. Like that, that sometimes like sounds really negative when I say it's not okay. Right. Somebody goes, man, you're harsh. It's like, am I? Or, is that the truth? Like the truth is like, hey, you made a commitment and you didn't fulfill it. That's not a good thing. And there's no realm in which that's going to be a good thing. But it doesn't mean that it reflects like how you are overall. It's a temporary misstep, right? That's the difference between lapse and relapse. And helping your clients recognize that is so freaking important. I'd say like, I like to do this. You guys know how much I like to say like the most important part of the day. I'd say this concept right here, it's the smallest part of our notes, but I'd say this is probably one of the most important things that you're going to learn today. Other than maintain simple awareness. That video is my favorite. I think awareness is the most important, but this is so important right here too. And like I said, relapse is actually falling back into old habits. So how do we keep a lapse from becoming a relapse? Sort of like a 5-step little play here, right? First thing, just accept that it happened, right? Don't try to deny it. Don't try to make it bigger than it actually is. Hit the replay button, go back through and say, okay, what actually happened, and then replay it with the correct action. Be like, okay, this is what happened, but I could have done this, right? And then in the future, just self-monitor and accept it and move on, right? Be like, okay, I'm gonna make sure that I keep an eye out in case this kind of thing happens again. Cool, self-monitoring, love it, right? You recognize that it was a problem, and then you don't need to let it sit with you forever, right? It came, it happened, it left, it's gone, moment over. Last little thing we're going to talk about here is rational emotive therapy. Before we go through this, looking at the stages of change, but rational emotive therapy, right? This is a form of therapy that helps decrease people's irrationality in how they think and speak, really. I love this. It's funny, there's not a lot of emphasis put in this one, and this is one of my favorite things. So I'll try to keep it somewhat brief. But rational emotive therapy, right, is taking control over the irrational sort of thoughts that we have a lot of times just by using our words properly. And so it changes the way an individual expresses in the hopes that that will create positive changes in their outlooks. And so the idea here is understanding that like the world is just a series of events and a series of like thoughts and reactions to those events. And you can either be very positive about responding to those, or you could be very negative, right? And so what we often see is a lot of people have automatic sort of problem thoughts, right? A lot of times like people will be really extreme. They'll use these like really extreme words. And by the way, like I'm totally one of these people because I love hyperbole. I love, right? I like to use super extreme words to describe things because I think that it's in a way very funny. I think that more extreme words are, funnier than like non-extreme words. And I think that's just like a little bit about like my personality. But like to say that I'm terrible at something versus like, yeah, I'm not as good at that as like a professional. Like that's a much more rational way of looking at something versus a very irrational way. And so if it becomes destructive, we need to be aware of it. And so we have extreme and absolute words here, right? Like I need to do this. And like, do you need to or do you want to? Right? Oh, I'm horrible at this. Are you horrible at it or did you miss a shot? Like, oh, I'm horrible at cornhole. It's like, really? You missed 1 out of 3 beanbags. Like, that's pretty good. You are batting 666. That's exceptional in the MLB. That's definitely something to be aware of there. It's like people say like Shaq was horrible at free throws. Are you better than Shaq at free throws? Like, don't be wrong, he's got the record for the most free throws missed in one game. However, it was also in the same season that he won a championship. So I don't know. To say Shaq is horrible at basketball or something is a pretty irrational way of looking at things. So that's where it really comes down to like rational emotive therapy, right? Automatic problem thoughts are people who have pervasive problematic thoughts that use these really extreme absolute words, right? So we want to help our clients generate alternatives to those words. And it's like, oh, I'm terrible at this. And it's like, you struggled with it. Oh, this is so hard. It's hard right now, like, but it's over in a minute, helping somebody like come from like this irrational, like super expressive way of talking to a more rational recognition that their thoughts should be more constructive is very, very helpful. So this is where sometimes you can see this another acronym. Welcome to psychology. EAT, emotion, automatic problem thoughts, and then turnaround thoughts. So you're going to have an emotion, which is going to lead to these kind of constant, like instant, automatically problematic thoughts, but then we can hopefully generate an alternative turnaround thought afterwards, right? So we help our clients sort of distinguish that. So somebody might go, yeah, here's like a lot of irrational beliefs, right? Catastrophizing is a big one. I tend to do this sometimes. I tend to catastrophize. But catastrophizing is where, oh, I'm stuck in traffic right now. That means I'm going to be late. If I'm late, I'm going to lose my job. If I lose my job, I'm going to be homeless. If I'm homeless, I'm never going to see my family again. Like super, like I took something very small, like someone cut me off for a second and turned it into the world's biggest problem, right? That's catastrophizing. Or overgeneralization, like, oh, I'm always so bad at this. Are you always? Like always? I'll actually a lot of times like sometimes I'll like call somebody out on overgeneralization if they use it about me sometimes. One of my least favorite things is where if you've ever done something one time and then somebody goes, oh, well, Brad always does this. It's like, really? Because Brad's done that once and you happen to see it recently and then it just happened for the second time ever. To say that I always, and I get like, drives me crazy. That's like, I'm very sensitive about that actually, I think. Because I really don't like, I think that's where stereotypes come from. Stereotypes are an example of like overgeneralization. People are like, oh, old people are bad drivers. And it's like, the problem with that type of thought, right, is that the next time you see somebody who's like young who does something stupid, your brain's not going to recognize it. And the next time you see somebody who's old, you're going to go, see, I was right. You overgeneralized and you created a confirmation bias. So we want to be open to our experiences instead. That happens constantly. Like, oh, I always struggle with my eating. That's overgeneralizing. Right? You tend to struggle when you are in specific situations. That's probably more accurate. And this is where we finally have like our schemas, which kind of show what I'm talking about here when I talk about automatic problem thoughts. But schemas are these pervasive, irrational fears that are really good at kind of resisting change. It takes a long time for us to kind of chip away at our schemas. I know I've got mine, you've got yours. My schemas are generally tend to be like where I'll sometimes get really negative on myself. About my productivity or like my performance, because I sometimes tend to be a little bit of a perfectionist in certain ways. And then other ways, like I'm totally not, sometimes I get really kind of laid back and lazy in a lot of ways. And so then I'll have like a really negative thought about that as well. So these are overgeneralization, catastrophizing, negative thinking. All of those are examples of like your schemas, right? And these resist change. It takes a little while to kind of chip away at these things. Like I said, I like to catastrophize. It's something that, I don't like it, but I do it, So being aware of it and taking a moment to be like, okay, I think I'm catastrophizing, I should calm down. My classic example of this that I always talk about is how, like, if I have a task, like I hate running chores where I have to drive around places because driving always takes longer than I think it will in my head. The accurate thing is that driving actually doesn't really take that long. But I have this schema that is like, I can't get a haircut today. because it's going to take 4 hours out of my life, and I've got people coming over in 5 hours. And so if I go get a haircut, I'm going to be late, and then those friends are going to, you know, be upset. Right, like that's like a schema that is very, very common for me. Or it'll be difficult for me to get out of the house to go grocery shopping, or it'll be difficult for me to get out of the house to run chores. I tend to really catastrophize when I have a lot of chores to do. So a lot of times, like one of the ways that I get over that is I will track how long it takes me to actually do these things, and then I see it written on paper, and I'm like, I was able to drive to Trader Joe's, get all of my groceries for the week, and back in 45 minutes. In my head, I thought it was going to take me 5 hours. Like, man, I have some irrational schemas, you know? So that's a lot of like how you can help your clients recognize that. One of the ways that I will do this with my clients is just helping them. It's like, hey, take the minute to recognize what your schemas are. Just take a second to realize that you are probably overgeneralizing here. Oh man, there's people staring at our driveway painting. Okay, so let's look at like which techniques apply to which stages of change, right? We do want to use interventions that are appropriate for whatever stage of change your client is in and match the appropriate techniques, right? Are you going to focus on helping your client recognize lapse or relapse? Are you going to use rational emotive therapy, stress management, problem solving, creating healthy obsessions? Like which of these is going to work? Whoops. Well, this is where we finally get to really come back all the way to NASM's like SWIM model. You'll remember the SWIM model from when we were talking about assessments. All of cognitive behavioral therapy is about how we think, right? So we're going to see every one of these land in the cognition stage here. If you got somebody who's in the pre-contemplation stage, remember, we focus on education, right? So how do we help someone like who's in pre-contemplation? We help them recognize that a problem exists, right? Like, hey, this is unhealthy. This is a problem, right? We help them recognize that. That's huge for the person who's not thinking about changing, because as soon as they recognize that a problem exists, they can start thinking about maybe I should make a change, right? Then in the contemplation stage, maybe we can help them identify their schemas or accurately define the problem. And remember, contemplation is all about getting them to recognize a problem exists in their world directly, right? If pre-contemplation is just educating, contemplation is about educating them specifically. It's like, how can my life be enhanced, right? So review this person's life, accurately define the problem associated with their life, identify their negative thoughts, and determine their schemas, right? Those are all things that you can do to help someone in contemplation. Then, like I've said in the past, here are the 3 stages you're actually probably most likely to see someone in a gym setting. These are always like you can use these if you have like a friend, you know, like these are the people in your life you can recognize these things in. These are the people who walk in the gym door. And so preparation helps somebody recognize like how active they are. It's like, okay, you're getting ready to start exercising regularly. Take this journal home, and I want you to monitor anything that you think is physical activity, whether it's going up a flight of stairs because you're at work, parking far away, doing a lap around your house after you're done with chores, doing some outdoor gardening, playing yard games. Any of those are going to be considered like active, and I want you to total up how many minutes you get over the course of this week, in addition to like actually working out in a traditional manner, right? And so then like helping them develop that awareness, that's really helpful for people in the preparation stage. Now, if they're in the action stage, now we get to verify things, right? Maybe we came up with an action plan before, so now we're going to verify and see how it worked, right? Let's take a look at how they're eating. Let's take a look at how they're moving, right? All those are really good examples of somebody who's in the action stage. They are working on it already, but now we're just going to enhance that and keep an eye on what they're doing right and maybe what they're doing wrong and how it can be improved, right? How's your eating been? Really, really good lately. Awesome. How's your working out been? Also really good lately. Awesome, man. I love it. Let's take a look at your stats. And then you look and it's like, yeah, sure enough, you are really crushing it lately. You're gaining muscle, you're losing fat, your blood pressure looks good, like all your resting heart rate's lowering. These are all really good things. This program is working really well for you. Let's set some more intense goals and see if we can push you even a little harder, right? Like that's great. And that's where you start to see like the maintenance stage, right? This is where people are developing a resilience to falling back into old habits. And the best way to do that is to sort of work towards that next level, right? You were inactive before, you're active now. Well, now let's see if we can make you athletic, and then let's see if we can get you to, you wanted to learn, you want you to one of the best examples of this. You guys remember, this is so popular and then it kind of disappeared. I don't hear about it anymore. But do you remember that app Couch to 5K when it came out? It was just this running app that you could get a service to, and it was like it would just have specific assignments. And the idea was that anybody who went through that program would be able to run a 5K at the end of X number of weeks. And so it was like, we're going to get you from the couch to running your first 5K. And then they came out with Couch to 10K, and then Couch to half marathon, and Couch to marathon. And I'm like, man, that is just awesome, right? You want to make sure that you don't lose the ability to run a 5K, learn how to run a 10K. You want to learn how to make sure you don't lose the ability to run a 10K, run a marathon. That's just a great example of somebody who's in that maintenance phase, and the types of tools at our disposal that really work. So today, not so much a very tangible day. I know that cognitive behavioral therapy, this is one of my favorite days. It's a lot of fun stories, and it's a lot of talks about like feelings and emotions and thoughts and things like that. I know that sometimes some people, I actually tend to be this kind of person. I like the more measurable, tangible stuff. Like when I can't hold something, I'm like, I get a little uncomfortable. Because I like to measure things, and sometimes it's hard to measure emotions, but hopefully you guys found today insightful. Do you have any questions before we kind of get you out of here? What's up, Irene?
Yeah, for EAT, E is for emotion, A is for automatic problematic thoughts. What does T stand for?
Turnaround thoughts. Turnaround.
Turnaround. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
So it's where you're going to like it's basically look at a 3-step process. Like, oh, I suck at this. Right? Stop right there. Recognize that like you're being irrational. You don't suck at this. What do you actually do? I struggle right now. Right. I'm in the middle of a struggle, right? That's different from sucking. That's sort of a turnaround thought. Coming up with a thought that's like much more constructive. I may be struggling with this right now, but it doesn't mean I have to struggle with it forever.
Okay.
This is like, I used to do this. I'll give you one really good example of when I was a kid playing Little League. I had this coach who, so when I was in Little League, I was really afraid of getting hit by the ball. I was like, I took one to the face like really early on. And just stood there. I actually remember when I got hit, and I just remember being like, oh man, that's gonna hit me right in the bam. And I was like frozen. And after that, like for the rest of the season, I had this really bad habit where I'd be like getting ready to hit, and I would drop my back leg back as I twisted. And so I'd have this weird, like, rather than like stepping into the ball and like using my body to generate power, I would actually step in the opposite direction and have to turn my arms further. And it was like a really bad habit. And my coach, and I was like, I got super down on myself. I was like a little kid. And I got super down on myself. And I was like, I'm so afraid of the ball. And I can't like, and I was in my outfielding too. I totally, I would do basket catches instead of like a traditional catch because I was afraid if I missed, it would hit me in the face. And my coach was like, all right. So he's like, well, I'm afraid I'm gonna get hit. I always get hit by the ball. And he's like, you get hit by the ball once. And he's like, all right, cool. And he's like, see you on Saturday. And I was like, we don't practice on Saturday. He's like, I will see you on Saturday. And he went over to my parents and I was like, we're gonna have a special practice. And he spent the entire day just lobbing like flies at me, and then eventually like hitting flies. And I had to get under the ball all day. And he's like, did you miss any of those? We just did like I think he said 100. I'm like, to this day I'm like, we didn't do 100. But like he threw like, and I was like, no, I didn't miss any of them. He's like, oh, well, actually, I mean, I did miss a couple. I lost it in the sun or something. But he's like, did you ever get hit in the face? And I was like, not even once. And he was like, so is it irrational for you to believe that you're gonna get hit? And I was like, yes, it's irrational. So then that got me over that. I learned how to catch. And then it was much harder like during pitches and stuff because, you know, it's like somebody throwing a ball and it can go anywhere. So I was all freaked out by it. And so he started taking his bag and he would put his bat bag behind me at the plate during practice. And he was like, "Don't you step on my bag." He was like, "If you step on my bag, you got to run laps." And I used to run a lot of laps. But eventually, like, he would scream that during a game, and I stopped, like, you know, stopped doing it. And then, like, he was like, "So, are you actually bad at, like, you know, are you good at stepping into it?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "That's not the right answer either." He's like, "Are you good or are you bad at it?" And I was like, "I do it sometimes." He's like, "That's the right answer."
He was,
It's just a much more, you know, rational way. Like, that's accurate. I wasn't always perfect at it, but I got better at
wow, he was your coach?
it. Yeah, and he was a clown too.
Oh,
He was in the Astoria clowning, whatever. I can't remember. I don't even know what he really did for a living. I just knew he was also a clown.
oh, like a real clown.
Like a clown, yeah. Like he was in the parades and stuff. We had Astoria for some reason, very small town, tons of parades. Like it's a really weird. Like there's like 6 or 7 parades every year, and so like yeah, he was always in like that. I don't know what he really did.
But that's so cool. He spent time with you on a Saturday to kind of help you overcome, like, you know, because like you were traumatized from.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And I took another ball to the back later that season, and that was actually a really good moment too. That was like a kid who just like flung it, and he was like this kid who got held back a year, so he was like huge, and we were all like, oh, and he like freaking winged, and just like I turned and he like hit me in the back, and I was like, it wasn't that bad, and that was like really where I finally like super got over it. I was like, oh, I just have to not get hit in the face.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, there's, you know, that's sort of the EAT, right? Turn your irrational words into constructive words. That's the main message after a very long story. Any other questions, guys? Right? It's like, good God, no. We don't need to hear any more of your life experiences.
I love that story. Coach, the clown. Oh my God.
Cool story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. My parents still know that guy. I should ask what he does. All right. I'm gonna let you guys go. And we'll get homework number 3 up tomorrow. That'll be our last homework, and then that's I know that's only one day before the final, so I will get that up as early as I can onto Canvas. That way you guys can really practice it. Normally I like to have kind of, you know, I like to have like that day of buffering between like lesson and final, but our final is going to be a little more homeworky in this class. Rather, like we'll go through our class and then we'll also kind of play the game and stuff like we normally do. But it'll sort of be paired up with a lecture this time, just because stuff got crammed together with the in-person stuff. So yeah, that's our plan of action. That's our problem solving over the next few days. We'll verify to see if it works. All right, see you later, guys.